Welcome to another deep dive. We are thrilled to have you joining us today.
Absolutely thrilled. It's great to be here.
We always picture you, our listener, as someone who is constantly on the lookout for that next great aha moment. You want to understand the mechanics behind fascinating stories without getting bogged down by a dry academic lecture.
Right, because nobody wants that.
Exactly. You're looking for the insights that change how you see the world, and that is precisely the kind of journey we have mapped out for this conversation.
It is a wonderful subject to tackle today. We are looking at a narrative that is remarkably self-contained, but it ripples outward to touch on some deeply universal themes.
Yeah.
Themes about identity, perception, and really the nature of artistic creation itself.
Today's mission revolves entirely around a single, highly detailed Wikipedia article. We are going back to the year 1917 to explore a musical composition called Morpheus. It was written by an English violist named Rebecca Clarke. And through this one piece of music, we are going to uncover a beautiful sonic landscape, examine the hidden identities she felt compelled to adopt, and look at the historical realities of the early 20th century classical music scene that ultimately forced her hand.
To properly ground ourselves in this story, we have to establish the historical reality she was operating in.
Right, context is everything.
Exactly. So the year is 1917. And Rebecca Clarke is not just a composer sitting comfortably in a study somewhere. She's an English violist actively pursuing a performing career in the United States.
She's on the ground.
She's on the ground. She is a working musician trying to navigate a foreign landscape, build a reputation, and make a living. That practical, day-to-day reality of being a performer is crucial to understanding the decisions she makes later on.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's begin with the composition itself, because the music is the entire foundation of this story.
It really is.
Morpheus is a piece written specifically for viola and piano. Just focusing on that instrumentation for a moment, it's a very specific choice.
It is.
The viola sits right in the middle of the string section. It is deeper and warmer than a violin, often described as having a slightly more melancholic or human voice-like resonance.
Yeah, it has that rich timbre.
Right. And when you pair that deep, woody sound with the expansive range of a piano, you are immediately setting up a very intimate, nuanced conversation between the two instruments.
It's a deeply expressive combination, and she utilized a very specific musical style to bring it to life. Morpheus showcases the impressionistic musical language that Clarke was actively developing.
Impressionistic.
Yes. For listeners who might not spend their weekends analyzing classical music theory, think of Impressionism in music very much like an Impressionist painting by someone like Claude Monet.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Instead of clear, rigid lines and highly predictable traditional melodies, Impressionism is about painting with sound.
It's a wash of color.
Exactly. It uses complex chords that blur into one another to create an atmosphere, a shifting mood, or a specific color, rather than a catchy tune you would just whistle while walking down the street.
That is a great way to visualize it. It's less about a strict mathematical structure and much more about the feeling it evokes. The documentation notes that her style was heavily modeled on the music of Claude Debussy and Ralph Vaughan Williams. You can see how she is taking cues from these absolute masters of atmospheric composition and adapting them for her own primary instrument.
Exactly. And she was clearly honing this voice across multiple projects. This same impressionistic language is also highly apparent in another of her major works, her Viola Sonata.
Okay, so it wasn't a one-off.
No, not at all. She wasn't just experimenting briefly. She was building a distinct, recognizable compositional identity drawn directly from these major impressionist influences. She was finding her voice.
The adjectives used to describe the specific vibe of Morpheus are particularly striking. The harmonies are described as ethereal and otherworldly.
Ethereal and otherworldly.
Yeah. When you think about that Monet painting analogy and then add those words, you can almost close your eyes and hear it. You have this shimmering, ambiguous piano part rolling underneath the deep, rich, human-like resonance of the viola. It is designed to feel untethered from reality.
That untethered atmosphere is the direct link to the title she ultimately chose. She named the piece Morpheus.
The god of dreams.
Right. In Greek mythology, Morpheus is a god specifically associated with sleep and dreams. But he isn't just the god of resting. He is the god who shapes the dreams and gives them form.
Wow.
When you pair ethereal, otherworldly harmonies with the god who literally shapes the dream world, you get a remarkably clear picture of the sonic landscape Clarke was attempting to create. It was entirely meant to transport the listener out of the physical concert hall and into a different state of consciousness.
So she writes this incredibly atmospheric, dreamlike piece in 1917 while she is navigating her career in the U.S. Let's trace the timeline of what happens once the ink is dry because the momentum builds very quickly.
It really does.
Clarke actually took on the responsibility of giving the first performance herself. She debuted Morpheus in a recital at the Aeolian Hall in New York City in February of 1918.
Stepping onto the stage at Aeolian Hall in 1918 is a significant undertaking.
It was a big deal.
A very big deal. It was a major venue for a working musician. It shows a level of professional traction. She's booking legitimate spaces in one of the most competitive music markets in the world to showcase her abilities.
She premieres it in the smaller, highly respected hall, but the real test is where it goes from there. Shortly after, in the spring of 1918, she takes it to Carnegie Hall.
The pinnacle.
That is the pinnacle. And it wasn't just a quiet performance that came and went. The historical record explicitly notes that this Carnegie Hall performance was met with great acclaim.
Great acclaim.
The audiences and the critical ears in the room are actively responding to this otherworldly music. The piece is, by all measurable metrics of the time, a hit.
It is a moment of undeniable professional triumph. A successful performance at a venue with the cultural weight of Carnegie Hall, resulting in great acclaim, is the kind of milestone that defines careers. It is the validation of all the work she put into developing that impressionistic style.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
She essentially engineered a scenario where her name was nowhere near this massive success.
It is one of the most fascinating pivots in early 20th century music history. Despite the great acclaim, she did not credit herself.
She writes this beautiful, ethereal composition. She walks out onto the stage at Carnegie Hall and physically plays the viola part herself, bringing the music to life for the audience. Yet when those audience members looked down at their printed programs, they didn't see Rebecca Clarke listed as the composer. She listed the work under a pen name.
A completely fabricated identity.
And it goes even deeper than just a printing decision. She actually signed the autograph score, the physical, handwritten sheet music, with this fake name. The pseudonym she committed to was Anthony Trent.
Taking a moment to consider the physical act of signing that score reveals a lot.
Yeah, think about that.
It is one thing to tell a venue manager to print a different name on a piece of paper for the evening. It is an entirely different level of commitment to sit at your desk, look at the intricate notes and dynamic markings you have poured your creative energy into, and physically forge the signature of an imaginary man.
That's heavy.
It is a deliberate, visceral act of masking her own authorship. It wasn't an oversight, it was a strategy.
When you look at why she felt compelled to execute this strategy, it boils down to a very specific professional anxiety. Clarke was highly self-conscious about how her recital programs looked.
Right.
Because she was the performer and she was organizing these events to showcase her skills, she was looking at a printed list of pieces. She felt that presenting a program entirely or heavily composed by herself might be perceived as vain or perhaps amateurish.
Too much of her own name?
Exactly. She was deeply worried about the visual repetition of having Rebecca Clarke listed over and over again as both the performer and the composer.
It speaks to the immense pressure she felt to curate her own image. She is trying to be taken seriously as a performer. She assumes, perhaps rightly given the era, that an audience seeing a self-funded, self-composed recital might dismiss it.
They might think she's just indulging herself.
Precisely. To solve the visual problem on the paper, she essentially invents an entirely new composer to act as her own opening act. Anthony Trent becomes a shield she can hold up to legitimize the program.
What's fascinating here is how the media and the critical establishment reacted to that printed program, because it perfectly crystallizes the reality of the environment she was navigating.
It's staggering.
The critics were sitting in the exact same room, listening to the exact same acoustics, hearing the exact same violist play the notes. Yet their reviews the next day presented a staggering contrast.
The media offered only light praise for the compositions that bore Clarke's real name.
Light praise.
Yes. But they greatly applauded the work of the non-existent Mr. Trent.
It is a stark, undeniable double standard.
The critical reception was clearly not based on the objective quality of the notes on the page or the emotional resonance of the performance. The reception was demonstrably filtered through the perceived gender of the composer.
Wow.
Anthony Trent, an entirely fictional entity, received the glowing accolades that Rebecca Clarke had earned through her own labor and genius. The praise was reserved for the male name.
It forces you to consider the psychological toll of reading those reviews. On one hand, she knows the music is good because Anthony Trent is being greatly applauded.
She knows her work is brilliant.
But on the other hand, she knows they are dismissing the music with her actual name on it. The documentation tells us exactly how this impacted her, and it is a heavy realization. This event only strengthened her belief that it was neither the time nor the place for female composers.
It is a profound and somewhat tragic reaction. The massive success of the piece did not empower her. The specific nature of that success, the undesirable fact that it required a male mass to be taken seriously and greatly applauded, actually validated her deepest, most crippling insecurities about her profession.
It proved her fears were justified.
Exactly. It proved to her that the bias she feared when she invented the pseudonym was not in her head. It was a tangible, measurable reality in the concert halls of New York.
She proved she had the talent to move audiences at Carnegie Hall, but in the exact same moment, she felt she proved that the establishment wasn't ready to accept her for who she was. It is an incredibly difficult catch-22 to navigate.
This raises an important question, however, because there is a highly complex paradox in Clarke's own thinking during this exact period.
A paradox.
Right around this same era, the same time she's internalizing this despair and concluding that it isn't the time or place for female composers, she wrote an essay. And in this essay, she articulates a completely different vision.
Really?
She speaks of the fertility of the United States to produce a major composer who happened to be a woman.
That contradiction is so rich.
It is.
Internally, she is dealing with the immediate fallout of the Anthony Trent situation, feeling defeated and self-conscious. But externally, when she sits down to write about the broader landscape of music, she is arguing that the United States is this dynamic, fertile ground ready to incubate a major female composer. It is a massive disconnect between her intellectual optimism and her lived reality.
It highlights a deep tension that many pioneers face. She possessed the intellectual clarity to see the potential for a woman to succeed in the abstract. She could observe the shifting culture of the United States and recognize the possibilities.
But her own experience was different.
Completely different. The harsh reality of the media's reaction to her own recital made her feel that this success was impossible for her in the immediate practical sense. She is caught in the space between hoping for a brighter future for others and surviving the biases of the present.
It makes you wonder if writing that essay was almost a defense mechanism or a way to manifest a reality she desperately wanted to believe in, even while she was forging Anthony Trent's name on her own sheet music.
It's entirely possible.
But despite all of that friction, despite the pseudonym, the critical double standard, and her own crushing insecurities, the music itself refused to fade away. Morpheus survives. And that survival is the real triumph of this story.
It doesn't just survive as a historical footnote either. It has actively flourished. The piece survives into the modern day in two distinct versions. Furthermore, the score was formally published by Oxford University Press.
That's a huge deal.
Massive. Having a piece picked up by a publisher with that level of prestige cements its academic and historical legitimacy forever. It moves the piece from a forgotten manuscript to a permanent fixture in the musical canon.
It has fully transitioned from a piece hidden behind a fake name to what is explicitly described as an integral part of the violist's repertoire. It is assigned to students, studied in conservatories, and performed on stages worldwide. The notes she wrote ultimately outlasted the critics who dismissed her.
To truly grasp how integral it has become to the modern classical landscape, we only need to look at the extensive modern discography.
Yeah.
The sheer volume of professional recordings over the last few decades speaks volumes about the enduring power of the piece. It is a testament to historical reclamation.
Let's trace how this piece has been embraced by modern artists, because this list is essentially a wall of proof that Anthony Trent couldn't keep Rebecca Clarke's genius hidden. You see this massive explosion of respect for her work beginning in the 1990s and continuing right through to recent years.
Right.
For instance, in 1994, Paul Coletti on viola and Leslie Howard on piano recorded it for Hyperion Records on an album titled English Music for Viola. That is a major early step in getting the piece into modern living rooms.
And a few years later, in 1998, Michael Ponder and Ian Jones recorded it for the Dun & Epoch label on an album wonderfully titled Rebecca Clarke, Midsummer Moon.
Midsummer Moon, I love that.
And as we move into the 2000s, the momentum only accelerates. In 2001, Daniela Conan and Holger Bluter recorded it for Coviello Classics under the straightforward title Rebecca Clarke, works for viola and piano.
Then the next year, in 2002, Helen Callis on viola and Robert McDonald on piano laid down a recording for the ASV Living Era label on an album called A Portrait of the Viola.
Nice.
And in 2004, Dame Avril Piston and Shimonia Harpa recorded it for the Guild label on an anthology with the incredibly evocative title Heartache, an anthology of English viola music. You can see how widely it is being programmed across different thematic albums.
The list continues to expand globally. In 2007, Philip Dukes and Sophia Roman dedicated time to it for Naxos Records on an album simply titled Rebecca Clarke Viola Music. And in 2008, Kenneth Martinson and Christopher Taylor included it on their Centaur Records release, Rebecca Clarke, String Chamber Music.
What is perhaps most telling about the piece's depth is when musicians keep returning to it.
Yes.
The bridge duo, which consists of Matthew Jones on viola and Michael Hampton on piano, actually recorded it twice.
They did.
Their first recording was in 2006 for London Independent Records on an album called Fantasy, English music for viola and piano. Then, that exact same duo went back into the studio and recorded it again in 2011 for Naxos Records, this time on an album called Intermezzo, placing Clarke's work right alongside heavyweights like Bax, Walton, Bliss, and Bridge.
That is remarkable.
When a duo goes back to record a piece a second time, it tells you this isn't just a historical curiosity to them. It is a living, breathing staple of their artistic expression.
When you step back and look at that span of recordings, across different decades, different major labels, and different interpretations by artists all over the world, it is the ultimate validation. The ethereal, impressionistic compositions she painstakingly crafted outlasted the pseudonym, outlasted the insecurities, and outlasted the critics who only had praise for an imaginary man.
It is incredibly powerful to hear all those names, from Paul Coletti to Helen Callis to Dame Avril Piston. All these modern musicians are dedicating their careers to playing the music of Rebecca Clarke, not Anthony Trent.
Precisely.
So, what does this all mean? We have looked at the impressionistic music, the historical reality of 1918, the necessity of the fake name, the contradictory essay, and the modern recordings that secured her legacy. What is the core takeaway for you listening right now?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this narrative is a profound testament to how truly brilliant work can endure, even when its creator is forced to hide behind a mask just to get a foot in the door. It serves as a vital reminder to look past the labels, the names, and the packaging on any project, and to focus entirely on the intrinsic quality of the work itself. Rebecca Clarke's music was always masterful. It simply took society a long time to realize that a composition didn't need a man's name attached to it to be worthy of great applause. The truth of the art eventually survived the biases of the era.
The art outlived the lie. And that brings us to a final thought we want to leave you with today. We've spent this time seeing how a masterpiece like Morpheus was only given the praise it rightly deserved when the critics were tricked into thinking a man named Anthony Trent had written it. The quality never changed, only the perception did.
Right.
So ask yourself, how much of the art, the media, or even the professional reports you consume today are judged not by their actual quality, but by your own unconscious assumptions about the name attached to them?
That's a great question.
What would happen if we consumed all information completely blind to its author? If you stripped away the names, the titles, and the expectations, would your opinions on what is truly great change? It's something to chew on as you go about your day.
It definitely is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring the ethereal world and the enduring triumph of Rebecca Clarke. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.